Good afternoon, and again, welcome to our presentation today. This is COVID-19 vaccine, facts over fiction. It is 2 o'clock, so I think we're going to get started here. I am going to turn the program over to Deb DeWalt. She is the Quality Improvement Director here at Network 9. So take it away, Deb.
Thank you very much, Sue. So once again, the next slide, please, is a reminder of housekeeping matters. All of your lines have been muted. Please enter your questions in the Q&A and chat sections. These will be monitored throughout the program today. Next slide. This presentation was created by the IPRO ESRD program, which represents 1/4 of all the ESRD patients in the U.S. The map in front of you depicts the 4 IPRO ESRD networks territories and patient and facility censuses. The topic for today's presentation was selected by the Quality Improvement Team after analysis of information collected during our COVID technical assistance calls, which determined that there was a hesitancy of vaccinations amongst ESRD professionals to receive the COVID-19 vaccine. Next slide. Okay, you got it. The objectives of this program are the following. One is to list the causes of vaccine hesitancy and how to work to overcome hesitancy, and discussing the safety and efficacy of the vaccine, describe the facts related to the vaccine and resources you can use to share those facts, list effective strategies to discuss COVID-19 vaccination with patients, and identify best practice to bolster vaccination use and to remain safe. There will be a short survey for you to complete at the end of this program to obtain your feedback. The presentation will complete and the survey will be immediately available for viewing. Next slide. The determination to receive a vaccine is a personal choice, but we do hope that this presentation will assist you in making a decision based on fact and credible science-based information. The numbers of vaccination hesitancy in the U.S. healthcare and ESRD population are similar, with 40% of all healthcare workers reporting a reluctance to receive the vaccine. Of those 40%, 29% will never take the vaccine. For community immunity to occur, there must be a minimum of 70% receipt rate of the vaccine. The top 3 reasons cited for refusal or hesitancy are the following. Persons requiring real world proof of the effectiveness and safety of the vaccine outside of the trial population. These persons would prefer to take a wait-and-see stance and state they may change their reluctance after 6 months or more. The second reason is demographics, which has been documented as those with less than a college education, those residing in rural communities, and people of color. People of color have reluctance based on previous experience or history related to systemic racism and unethical practices that may have occurred within their populations. The final expressed factor is adverse reactions. The most severe adverse reaction is anaphylaxis or severe allergic response. The rate for this reaction is 11.1 million doses received. Of the cases reported, all have recovered. Many of these people have had a previous history of anaphylaxis and may carry a self-injectable medication to prevent this response ongoing. Next slide. Behavior-based strategies to influence vaccination acceptance are listed as follows. The attitude of leadership is key in preventing hesitancy. Facilities that have leaders that have set the right tone and example have a higher rate of vaccination. Other factors that may influence vaccine resistance are presenting it as a public act to benefit others, and that the vaccine is free of charge. And if you miss the opportunity to receive it on the timeline specified for your profession, it may be difficult or more difficult to receive the vaccine in the future. The final reason is a add-on reason that has been circulating, is that people who do not receive the vaccine in the future may be denied access to schools, restaurants, gyms, air travel, cruise lines, and other public places as the community becomes increased with vaccination recipients. The next section of our presentation will provide critical facts on the safety and efficacy of the COVID-19 vaccine and attempt to remove some of the most common reasons to refuse the vaccine. Next slide. Our guest speaker today is Dr. Vidya Krishnan. Dr. Krishnan is a pulmonary critical care and sleep physician at Case Western Reserve University in Cleveland, Ohio. For the past 14 years, she has held major teaching positions at the Case Western Reserve University School of Medicine. She is the chairperson for the American Thoracic Society Patient and Family Education Committee, and since the pandemic began, she has worked on the front line in the medical intensive care unit and has been a research investigator on 2 multi-center, multinational studies related to COVID-19 therapy. She has presented on the topic of COVID-19 for the Case Western Reserve Medical School, hospital, faculty, paramedics, including the Metro Life Flight EMS, and we are honored to have her here today to provide her knowledge and expertise. I present you Dr. Krishnan.
Thanks, Deb. Thanks, everyone. Just an audio check. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Great. Yeah, so thanks for this invitation to speak for your program. This is a topic that's close to my heart, and since the pandemic has really affected all of us on a personal and professional level, it would be a real gift to see the numbers of patients contracting COVID to decrease and the number of patients who are being hospitalized for that number to also decrease. When these vaccines were approved by the FDA through the emergency use authorization at the end of December, it felt like a light at the end of the tunnel. And so this is a great program to spread the knowledge of how these vaccines were developed and the importance of all of us using it. So why is it important to get vaccinated? Like was mentioned, the greater the number of the general population that's vaccinated, the better the vaccine will provide immunity. This is the concept of herd immunity, which is an awful term, but that's what it is. It's really describing that not 100% of the population needs to get the vaccine. So some people who cannot because of anaphylactic reactions or because of acute illness can still get protected if the majority of us get the vaccine. And that degree of herd immunity depends on the case fatality rate, how many people die from the disease, as well as how many people contract the disease, the transmission rate. But about 70% or more of the population getting vaccinated would generally provide immunity for the whole population. It's also important to protect yourself. You're all frontline workers working with vulnerable patients. Protect yourself, your families, and the patients is a top priority. It's a safe way to build immunity against this virus, and perhaps other coronaviruses as well. And I'll show you that the mRNA vaccine is not specific to coronavirus, but it's effective. And it's a promise of the future to come back to some sense of normalcy in our personal lives and at work. So, next slide. Who should get vaccinated? The CDC put out this recommendation for who should and who can get vaccinated. So in the green section are the people who can and should proceed with getting vaccinated. The trials for both the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines included patients who are immunocompromised, but they did not include patients who were pregnant or breastfeeding. However, the antibodies that are created by the vaccine have been studied and deemed safe even in pregnancy and in lactating women. So for those conditions, the recommendation is to go ahead, proceed with vaccination. With all of the vaccinations, there is a requirement of observation for at least 15 minutes to observe for any side effects. For people who have had moderate or severe acute illness and with acute symptoms, it would be hard to distinguish between which symptoms are related to the vaccine and which are not. So in the yellow section, acute illness is considered a precaution to vaccine, and this would require a discussion with your physician, a risk assessment, and potentially to delay the vaccine, but not to absolutely not get it. It would just be a delay in the vaccination. And when you do get vaccinated, to use the 15-minute observation period. There really aren't any contraindications to the vaccine in terms of comorbid diseases and conditions. As far as allergy histories are concerned, a history of allergies that are unrelated to the components of the vaccine, allergies even to other vaccines, these are still okay to go ahead with getting the COVID-19 vaccine. But again, a longer observation period, 30 minutes is generally recommended for these people who have this history. If a person has had a history of immediate allergic reactions to vaccines, and particularly to the PEG component of the vaccine, those people may have a higher risk of developing an immediate reaction to the COVID vaccine. And they, again, should undergo a discussion, a risk assessment, and if it's decided that the vaccine is appropriate, then a longer 30-minute observation is recommended for those people. And then it's those people who do have a history of a severe allergic reaction to the first dose of the COVID-19 vaccine or any of its components, or an immediate allergic reaction to the polyethylene glycol, the PEG component. Those people are the ones that they're recommending not to get the vaccination. And that is where the herd immunity comes into effect, and it's helpful for many other people to get vaccinated. Next slide. So then, the majority of people should really be considering getting vaccinated. But there are conditions that you may want to consult with with a provider. And those would be in people who have a history of any prior reaction to a vaccine, any reaction to polyethylene glycol in particular, the PEG component of the vaccine, people who have a history of anaphylaxis. That's when their throat is closing off. It's an immediate reaction, and they carry around an EpiPen, an epinephrine injector for this kind of allergy. Patients with cancer might be considered immunocompromised, and whether they should be getting the vaccine, although like in the previous slide, the recommendation is to vaccinate immunocompromised patients. Pregnant and lactating women may want to have this discussion with their physician as well, just because of the limited exposure in the initial phase 1 through 3 trials, and other complex illnesses where the development of antibodies is in question. And those are the people that you would want to consult your physician. And I would add to this list those people who have acute illness as well, because like I said, it'll be really hard to distinguish between those symptoms that you're having from the acute illness and what are side effects from the vaccine. So, next slide. How to proceed with vaccine post-COVID infection. For people who have been infected with the COVID-19 infection, the vaccination should be deferred until there's complete recovery from the illness and isolation is discontinued. So if symptoms are self-limited and only last a few days, then once the symptoms have resolved and isolation is discontinued, which is usually a 2-week course, then it's safe to go ahead and proceed with the vaccine. People may want to delay the vaccine for the full 90 days after getting ill, but there is no minimum interval that's being recommended between the infection and the vaccine. There has been anecdotal data that people who have had the COVID infection may have more side effects from the vaccine, but the side effects, as we'll talk about in the following slides, are mild, much milder than the COVID infection, and signifies that somebody has a robust immune system, that they're able to mount that kind of response. Next slide. So the 2 vaccines that have been given FDA approval through the emergency use authorization is the one by Pfizer was granted first, and then Moderna the week after, both at the end of December. Both have shown over 90% efficacy in the randomized controlled trials studying these vaccines against placebo. The Pfizer vaccine was studied in patients 16 years and older, whereas Moderna was restricted to 18 years and older. And both of them required 2 doses, with the second dose 3 to 4 weeks after the first one. In those randomized controlled trials testing these vaccines, chronic kidney disease patients were included in the sample, but dialysis patients were not. Additionally, as mentioned, the pregnant patients and lactating patients were not included in the study. However, the antibodies that were formed were studied and deemed safe in those conditions. And so that's why the vaccine is being recommended for patients on dialysis, for pregnant patients, and lactating patients. It is an mRNA vaccine, as you probably have heard, and the point of the vaccine is to induce an immune response, and so a minimum interval of 14 days should occur between this vaccine and any other vaccine. For example, it's flu season, so a lot of people are also getting the flu vaccine. The vaccine safety profile is within expected ranges for any vaccine because it does boost up the immune system. There are some immune-related side effects that have been observed, but not out of the realm of what we would normally see. For example, Bell's palsy is a type of temporary paralysis of the facial muscles, and it is considered an autoimmune response. It occurred at the same rate in both the patients who were receiving the vaccine and patients who are receiving placebo. it was reported at a rate of about 4 per 30,000 subjects in the 2 different studies, in both the vaccines that were studied. The rate of Bell's palsy in the general population is about 1 for every 10,000. So this is completely within the realm of what is expected, especially when they're conducting these large trials. Local and systemic reactions do occur fairly common, particularly after the second dose is administered. Next slide. So how the vaccine works. The mRNA vaccine, this is the first one that being administered, but it's not new technology. This was developed over 20 years ago and has been studied ever since the previous coronavirus pandemics, like the severe acute respiratory syndrome, SARS, back in 2002, and the Middle Eastern respiratory syndrome back in 2012, were both coronaviruses. And this mRNA technology was created even back then for vaccination. The way that this vaccine is working is it encodes, the mRNA encodes the spike protein. It's just one single protein that's on the coronavirus, and that protein is what attaches to human cells and allows for the virus to enter human cells. So this vaccine creates codes for that spike protein. Once it's injected into somebody, it enters the immune cells, but not into the nucleus of the cell. So it stays in the cytoplasm, where it is used to encode proteins that are similar to that spike protein, and then the body reacts and says this is a foreign body that shouldn't belong here, and starts to develop antibodies against that spike protein. The mRNA itself and the cell, and the antigen-presenting cell, also dies after a few replications, and it's never incorporated into the DNA, which is located in the nucleus, separate from where the mRNA acts. Next slide. So with that basis, we'll just talk about some facts over fiction, some myths that are out there, and what is the real truth that we know about the COVID vaccine. Next slide. So fiction, the vaccine can give me COVID-19. That is a myth, right? The fact is the COVID-19 vaccines, both of them, Pfizer's and Moderna, are only encoding a single protein. The mRNA vaccine does not include live virus, and so it cannot cause a COVID infection. The vaccine does not affect or enter the recipient's DNA, as I mentioned already. The mRNA never enters the nucleus. It stays in the cytoplasm, and the cell itself breaks down and gets rid of the mRNA after it's completed its purpose in encoding the spike protein. Next slide. I think it's very helpful to know where the resources are to get the reliable scientific information that we know about these vaccines. The CDC has resources to learn more about the mRNA COVID-19 vaccines that you can download directly from their website. You may also want to look at some of the professional societies. Like was mentioned, I work closely with the American Thoracic Society Patient Family Education Committee, and we've created patient family education materials regarding COVID-19. Vaccinations are in the works there. The Infectious Disease Society of America, IDSA, also has some excellent resources if you want to get firsthand information about the vaccine. Next slide. So another myth here, fiction, that there was a rush to get the vaccine approved. The fact is that this occurred during a pandemic. So in that sense, it was urgent to get a vaccine, but the standard approach to FDA approval was met for both of the vaccines that are available. The emergency use authorization, the EUA, was issued by the Food and Drug Administration for both vaccines. The FDA is responsible to the public for when there is a public health emergency, so I think it's a necessary response to create a vaccine to end this pandemic. But it doesn't mean that we've compromised on the standards that the FDA has created for vaccines. The EUA is used to promote and provide access to drugs as needed, to diagnostic testing, and critical products during a public health emergency like we're in. Next slide. And so just so you're aware of what those standards are that the FDA has put forward for vaccine safety, all vaccines start off by bench work, some laboratory testing to actually develop the molecule of interest. If it shows any promise in the laboratory, then animal testing is done extensively for safety and other considerations for the vaccine. And then only then, if it still shows promise, will there be clinical trials in human subjects. And I have 3 phases here, but it's really 4. So phase 1 is when a small number, somewhere between 20 and 100 healthy volunteers, are asked to undergo testing with the vaccine. And they're basically just studying any potential side effects and what is the safety profile for this vaccine. Then in phase 2, they look at several hundred healthy volunteers, and they continue studying any potential side effects, but now they're also looking at the dosing of the vaccine and the lasting immune effect of the vaccine. In phase 3, this is when they start recruiting thousands of volunteers, and they do randomized controlled trials to actually study the safety and efficacy of the vaccine, and also continuing to study the side effects. And so in these studies, there was over 30,000 people who were involved in the phase 3 trials for both vaccines. And then phase 4 is when the vaccine is actually rolled out to the public, as it is now, and safety data continues to be collected. Actually, on the CDC website, they're tracking any side effects for the vaccines that are being reported directly by patients or by healthcare facilities. Next slide. So another myth here, this vaccine has severe side effects. The fact is it's a vaccine. There are side effects, but they're really overall, the majority of them are quite mild. 80 to 89% of clinical trial participants had maybe one, if not none, local reactions, just pain, some muscle soreness, some swelling at the injection site, the same site as the vaccinated arm. In 55 to 83% of clinical trial participants, they reported maybe one systemic reaction, like fever, fatigue, the muscle aches, headaches, and chills. Some people are concerned that these symptoms sound an awful lot like the symptoms of COVID-19 even too. When they happen within the first day or 2 of getting the vaccine, they're generally considered a side effect of the vaccine and self-limited, and they get better. We are doing this during a pandemic, so there are people who develop COVID infection in between vaccines, dose 1 and dose 2, or even after dose 2 if they haven't developed the immune response yet after 2 weeks. So, precautions are still recommended in terms of washing your hands, keeping a safe distance, and mask wearing for those people as well. Most symptoms are mild to moderate in severity, may occur, like I said, in the first 3 days of getting vaccinated and often resolve in a day or 2. I was maybe one of the fortunate ones. I'd gotten both of my vaccines, and all I had was just some mild soreness in my arm, thank goodness. But the recommendation is NSAIDs or Tylenol even can help mitigate those symptoms. The symptoms are more frequent and severe following the second dose, and probably more frequent in younger age groups because they just have a more robust immune system. So next slide. And the severe reaction data that we have to date, this comes from the Pfizer vaccine in particular. They reported 21 cases of anaphylaxis, which is the severe reaction that's reported in 1.89 million doses that were administered. So about 11 cases per million doses. And as was mentioned, most of those people who developed anaphylaxis, 17 of them had a history of allergies or allergic reactions with prior anaphylaxis. And so that screening is done, and that's why the longer observation period is recommended after those people get the vaccine. Median interval onset of symptoms is about 13 minutes. So the 15 to 30 minutes is generally a safe window of observation. And of those cases, there was follow-up information on 20, and all of them recovered and did just fine. So, so I think the severe reactions are very rare and probably on the range of other vaccines that we've all received. And then I'll hand it back to Deb regarding talking with patients. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Krishnan, for your presentation, and we will allow questions and answers at the end of the webinar to allow Dr. Krishnan a thorough answering of your questions. Please place those questions in the Q&A section. Next slide. So we have to talk with our patients about the vaccine, and we know that vaccine hesitancy is higher among healthcare professionals than it is among ESRD patients. It is very important when speaking with patients to provide just the facts. It is a responsibility of the health provider to provide and cite accurate, credible resources when discussing COVID-19 with your patients. These resources are provided throughout the presentation, and you'll find many of them in the links on each slide. Most importantly, it is important to remove any of your personal bias and choose the appropriate words to frame your discussion or educational sessions. If you are not able to answer a particular question, it is okay, and you should refer those specific healthcare concerns to the patient's physicians. The reference below is from the Ohio Department of Health, which provides speaking points and word selections to use in the conversations to improve communication regarding facts of the vaccination. Next slide. So, making a strong recommendation for the vaccine, one of the things that is very important is to start at a place of empathy and understanding. The pandemic has been stressful to many people for many reasons, and the first step is to acknowledge the disruption that COVID-19 has caused in all of our lives, providing an opportunity to recognize those concerns that may be addressed by this vaccine, as well as assume that patients want to be vaccinated. Consider providing the general information to patients with what they should expect. It's very important to remember that most of the patients do want to be vaccinated, and that healthcare professionals are consistently ranked very high as a most trusted resource for any health information, and especially vaccination information. In this unique position, you are able to provide a strong recommendation that is critical for vaccine acceptance. You should share the importance of COVID vaccine 19s to protect your patient's health as well as the health of those around them, and to talk about their personal plans to get the vaccine. Examples of positive phrases to include when discussing the COVID vaccine are, I strongly recommend you get a COVID vaccine once it is widely available. This shot is especially important for you because you are a dialysis patient, and I believe in this vaccine so strongly that I plan to get it as soon as it is available. Next slide, please. Your willingness to listen to patients' concerns will play a major role in building trust in you and your recommendation. Make it clear that you understand that they have questions and you want to answer them so that they feel confident in choosing to get vaccinated. It's very important to provide credible resources. Because these vaccines are new, your patient's comfort level with getting vaccinated may vary. And continue to remind them about the importance of getting a COVID vaccine during future routine visits and dialysis treatments. And the resources on this page provide a question and answer sheet and vaccination badges for your staff to wear, which do portray a level of trust to the patients. Once you have answered their questions, you need to let the patients know that you are open in continuing your conversation with them, and also encourage the patients to take at least one action. And one of these actions can either be scheduling a future appointment for a vaccination, or at least reading the information that you provide them about COVID-19 vaccination. Next slide. Steps to promote effective communication include, but are not limited to, being aware of your nonverbal communication. Remember that appropriate body language, posture, and go a long way in nurse communication, both with your patients and your colleagues. You should try to use active listening, which means that you listen to understand, not solely to respond. This is one of the most effective principles, that if the patient feels that they're being heard, this conversation could go a lot more further than just imparting knowledge without feeling them out as to how they're really understanding and feeling about the vaccine. Inspire trust. Always keep your word. Never make promises you're not able to keep. If you can't answer a question, it is okay to say you don't know the answer. And more importantly, listen to your patients and take all their concerns seriously. Well, of course, we want to treat our patients with dignity and respect during all of our conversations with them. Next slide, please. There are some cultural factors, and being aware of different practices and gestures are not accepted by all cultures. And consider your actions and strive for cultural awareness every time you communicate with the patient. You may actually even ask them if there are any barriers in their culture that they need to have addressed regarding the vaccine, and then go out and find the best resource to maybe alleviate those hesitations. Written communication, we've probably linked you with about 15 credible resources during this presentation, that some are created at the level of patient understanding and some of a professional understanding, but providing as many resources and as possible are very important. Sometimes patients don't hear you today, but they may take their information home and review it with their family members or caregivers and get more input from that group, their support group. Always plan your message. It's really important that you pretty much keep consistent with your messaging. It's also really helpful if you've already got the visual aid that you want to use during your presentation on hand and not interrupt the conversation. And most importantly, and last but not least, maybe more important of anything that has to do with communication in a dialysis facility, is really to be aware of who's listening. We work in a very close environment, and many of the patients are listening all the time to what their caregivers are saying, whether it is a one-on-one conversation or a conversation that is with another employee. During this time, it's really important to be critical of the close environment of the dialysis facility and making sure that we are not citing personal bias during the course of any of our conversations. Next slide, please. Our next presenter is Evan Coker, and Evan has been supporting ESRD patients for over 14 years. Evan is a dialysis patient, and he has successfully established patient support groups and has one patient support group he has been working with for the past 12 years. He currently serves as a member of the Kidney Patient Advisory Community for the National Kidney Foundation and is a patient representative for Network 9, serving on the NCC CASER and NCC Home Affinity groups, and in addition to serving as a patient facility representative. So, Evan, we brought you here today to speak and provide your insight on a few questions. And our first question for you, Evan, is what are your feelings regarding the COVID-19 for yourself?
So this is Andrea. He's muted and I'm trying to unmute him.
I have already unmuted him, Andrea.
Okay, just wanted to make sure.
Evan, are you there? Could you say something so we can hopefully hear you? I wonder
because I'm watching on the computer and I'm listening on the phone to make sure I got the good audio. Can everybody hear me?
We can. Thank you,
Evan.
Yeah,
We brought you here
my
today.
audio on the computer to simplify my own feedback problems.
Great.
Okay. Yes, everybody can hear me now, right?
Yeah, we were wondering what your feelings were regarding to receiving a COVID-19 vaccine.
Yes, I heard your question. I just couldn't get my audio to be quite right on the computer. I had muted it on the phone, and I was hoping the mic on the computer was good, but it wasn't. So, in any case, not sure why. We'll double check later. Not important. But yes, the COVID vaccine. My wife and I are both dialysis patients. We met at the support group in 2010, and she's here with me if anybody has any questions about her perspective. She's also a transplant patient, got a kidney pancreas transplant. The pancreas is still working. The kidney is on the fritz. So she's still immunosuppressed, and her perspective is interesting from that point of view because she's a unique dialysis patient who's also on an other organ transplant and is immunosuppressed. So, but my own perspective on the whole thing is, yes, this is something I want as soon as we can have it. The dialysis unit has said originally back in the beginning of January that they had talked about it at higher levels of management and they were expecting it by the end of January. Right now they're revising that because they're not sure how soon that'll be coming, but it seems like something that's going to be available relatively soon. We are concerned because the supply has been not as not as robust as advertised. Let me put it that way.
So,
To be
Evan, why
polite.
do you feel confident in receiving the vaccine?
Well, it's not that I have read everything I could about it. It's not the kind of vaccine that generates a lot of negative side effects. It's just pretty typical vaccine reaction immune system responses. So, from my perspective as a dialysis patient, I'm in a lot hotter water if I don't take the vaccine than if I do. And my wife feels the same way, despite being immunosuppressed. Everything we've come across for transplant patients appears to also, even if the response may take a little longer or in her case, because of her immune suppression, that it's still going to be a better response than no response.
Right.
And
Ev-
that's been
so,
her perspective.
I'm
Yeah,
sorry. Go ahead, Evan.
No, you can continue. You
So,
had another question.
going forward, Evan, we're gathered here with a group of professionals, and we're asking your opinion and feedback on what information do you think is pertinent for the ESRD community to be aware of regarding the vaccine. And if you were watching the presentation and able to see the slides, what information going forward would you find most useful to be shared?
I think I missed a lot of the earlier slides because I was having a problem accessing the WebEx, but we were able to work that out behind the scenes, and I got in sometime around, I don't know, slide 16 or something like that.
Okay.
14, it was somewhere in there. I didn't look at the number until we'd already been a few slides in, but in any case, from the data that I heard on the call, and I did hear the whole call. In any case, I am looking at all that stuff, and I wasn't able to see the earlier slides, so I may have missed a great deal on that, unfortunately. But as far as the data that I did see, it looked like there was no obvious objection. The one question I did have was regarding the Bell's palsy. I've never heard anybody say the duration of the temporary Bell's palsy. That's a question
Okay,
I
we could
have
bring that
before I could.
forward. We could bring that forward to Dr. Priestman at the end, but were there any pointers or anything that you would have to present this material to the ESRD population, Evan?
I think the main pointers are just basically that the data is pretty clear. There haven't been a lot of serious problems. There have been very few, and all of those seem to be tied to things like anaphylaxis. And that's a typical response that anybody with, immune sensitivity might have if they get any vaccine, as the doctor said.
Well, thank you, Evan, for joining us today, and we may contact you later to pick your brain and tell us your
My wife is
experience.
here if you have any questions for her.
Well, we're going to move on because we want to make sure to have some time at the end for the physician to speak. But moving on to our next best practices.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So, Sue, if you advance the slides, thank you, Evan, very much. Some of our best practices that we have been collecting have been slowly rolling in, but one of the best practices that we found in the last week during our COVID technical assistance calls and other outreach calls to providers really are about conveying trust. And earlier in the presentation, we discussed the importance of leadership and the patient's trust in their healthcare team as strong influencer. And one best practice that we unearthed is from the DaVita Appleseed facility in Fort Wayne, Indiana. And this unit has 100% of their staff vaccinated and will soon become a county provider to all of the dialysis facilities located in the county. The manager is Lisa Chelf, and she created a bulletin board in a prominent place in the unit. And on this board, she has posted why I got the COVID-19 vaccine and statements from all of her staff interspersed with educational information on the vaccine. This is really thought to be a highly effective practice, which we would like to see spread throughout the IPRO ESRD network, and it would be very easy to implement. And we are looking forward to seeing future bulletin boards from many of you. Until we have further vaccinations in the community, it is most important to remain safe. It is our hope that the science-based data-driven program will provide the incentive for increased vaccination. But once again, until we have 70% or greater of the general population vaccinated, it is crucial to continue with the precautions of masking, social distancing, and frequent hand washing. Next slide. The resources on this page provide short videos from the CDC on materials that may serve as a refresher to you and your staff. All of these are very short vignettes. They may help you to maintain and sustain increased vigilance until we can report that community immunity is achieved and we no longer have to do quite as many of these things for quite as often and for as long. So without any further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Sue, who will present questions received in the Q&A chat. And perhaps we could start with Evan's question to Dr. Krishnan regarding the Bell's palsy and how long would you imagine that is there any data-driven evidence of how long Bell's palsy may take to resolve?
Yeah, I don't know specifically what those people who did develop Bell's palsy in the vaccine studies had, but most of them were diagnosed within 30 days of getting the vaccine. Bell's palsy in general lasts about 3 to 6 months or so at most, and is self-limited. More than 90% of them resolve on their own, but but there's also treatments for it too. Systemic steroids are very effective if given within the first 2 or 3 days or so of developing symptoms.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Krishnan. I do have a couple of questions here in the chat from Elena, and I will apologize if I mispronounce the medication that she's asked, but do you have any information on the safety of the vaccines for patients on Remicade or biologics? I've heard dosing of these meds may need to be adjusted prior to administration of the vaccine.
Great question, and honestly, I don't know the answer to that. The vaccine is recommended in immunocompromised patients, and so it's still recommended, but as far as the dosing of the Remicade, I'm not sure.
Thank you. Okay, and her second question, what about a history of sensitivity but not allergy to the vaccine? Should you pre-medicate, and what do you recommend?
They're not recommending pre-medication for the vaccines, but if you've had sensitivities in the past, that would be a reason to just prolong the observation period afterwards. After you get the vaccine, Tylenol and NSAIDs are safe to use if you have no other contraindications to them to help mitigate the symptoms. Benadryl and other antihistamines can also be used after administration of those vaccines.
And we have another, thank you again. And we have another question from Susan. Why are dialysis patients not considered high risk? They may, as many patients that are 70 years of age or older, they've been told they will not be able to get this vaccine at this time. So they have to wait till they get into the 70 category to get the vaccine.
I believe the Nephrology Society has been advocating for that exact reason, to include dialysis patients in the high-risk category. It is considered a mild immunosuppression in those patients who are on dialysis. The risk factors, though, that have been studied for COVID patients, ESRD, end-stage renal disease, or dialysis hasn't been documented as one of the clear risk factors for developing severe COVID-19, such as diabetes, lung disease, heart disease has been clearly shown to have that risk. But I agree with you. I think it is a condition that we need to protect the patients.
Andrea, can you see any further questions? I'm having trouble reading them in the Q&A.
This is Vicki. I just wanted to add to that question that Dr. Krishnan just answered. There are some states that are starting to move dialysis patients into the 1B group, and they're starting to administer. So advocacy at the state level is proving very effective, and I agree with Dr. Krishnan that certain professional groups are advocating, and we as a network are trying to advocate within our state systems to get the vaccine moved up for patients. So, any open ear, any conduit that you have as providers out there can help this. And there are states that are rolling that back and putting them in under like the comorbid condition area, things of that nature, and allowing them to start getting vaccinated now. But I had a question for Evan about his wife, because she's a solid transplant organ recipient, and she actually is qualified to receive the vaccine. Has she in fact taken the vaccine?
We have not been given access to the vaccine yet. To answer that question.
So are they
we're
saying
waiting for our first dose? It was supposed to be toward the end of January. We're looking at mid-Feb right now. That's what we have been told.
Oh, I would have thought as a transplant recipient, she might be slightly, because they are actually listed in the comorbid conditions that I've seen as a solid organ.
Well, she might be eligible for that, and we have not approached the Cleveland Clinic yet about that. So that's a good question.
I would definitely reach out to your transplant program, because she should be more eligible faster than maybe yourself in terms of being a transplant recipient.
Well, thank you for pointing that out. So she's eager to get the vaccine as soon as possible.
Right. I have one other question, Evan. What do you hear patients saying? Like, do you believe that patients strongly believe in the vaccine, or do you feel that the patients need more convincing?
Well, the conversations I've had with patients have been interesting, because mostly they're the same. It seems like they're the same as people in the actual, normal groups. They seem to have like, I don't want that vaccine, or I definitely want that vaccine. Sort of there's not a lot of middle ground. The people seem to have investigated what they can, and they feel pretty strongly either way. I haven't had a lot of people who were wishy-washy about it.
That's interesting. We're hoping we had some fence sitters we can push over the fence. So thank you. Thank you for sharing your perspective.
Okay, we have a couple more questions for Dr. Krishnan. I have a question. Patients on blood thinners, is there any barriers to receiving the vaccine? And, I guess it's one of the screening questions when they go to schedule. And do you feel that they should have clearance by their PCP before they get this scheduled and before they receive the vaccine?
Interesting. There's no barriers to getting the vaccine if you're on antiplatelets or anticoagulants. In fact, patients who have gotten COVID are at high risk for thrombotic complications. So continuing those medications, I think, are important while you're at risk of contracting the illness itself. But for the vaccine, it's just like any other intramuscular injection. there may be some increased risk of local bleeding, but even that, if done by a qualified personnel, it really is minimal risk.
Thank you. Okay, I have another question from Sandy. Can you discuss ACE and ARB sensitivity amongst ethnic groups, and does this place one group at higher risk over another?
That's a great question. I think if you're referring to our experience with COVID-19 disease itself and not the vaccine, but early in our experience with the COVID-19 illness, we saw that we were concerned that there are angiotensin receptors that seem to be targeted by that spike protein and by the coronavirus. And so those ACE inhibitors and ARBs may interact with the virus and the infection itself. That has not borne out in any of the observational studies. And so overall, the recommendation is for continuing those medications and that they don't seem to interact with the illness and the virus itself. The ethnic differences in patients who are receiving ACE inhibitors and ARBs and how severe their COVID illness is, that has been documented, but again, those are in observational studies, and I don't think a mechanism really was understood why that was happening, or if there was a confounder. Maybe it was some other reason why particular groups were at risk of developing more severe illness. That part of it wasn't clear in those studies.
And I have a couple more questions. Well, someone asked if transplant is not considered high risk for the delivery of the vaccine. Is this a state-by-state determination?
I think that was what Evan was discussing there just now with one of the other panelists too, that it is considered a high-risk group in local areas too, so I would probably defer to your local expertise there.
And if you look at, Sue, this is Vicki, if you look at the CDC requirements for comorbids, solid organ transplant is one of the comorbid conditions that allow, states to move people up. So it depends on how states are handling those comorbid condition requirements, whether they're moving them up and allowing injection now. Again, that's kind of a state-by-state thing, but I know in Ohio, for example, they do have that listed as a reason to get earlier.
And then could you speak a little bit about the V-Safe program?
The V-Safe program, I believe, is that the?
I believe that's the app to track
the side effects.
Mm-hmm.
The CDC is collecting data on everybody who's received a vaccine. And if you go to the CDC website, there's a place that if you feel like you've experienced any sort of complication from receiving the vaccine, they're collecting that data in order to enhance that phase 4 of the vaccine safety profile.
Well, thank you so very much. I think that's the end of our questions. I don't see anything else in the Q&A or chat. And it is about 3 o'clock. So I think we'll move on, but I would just like to thank everyone for being here. Thank you, Dr. Krishnan and Deb DeWalt and Evan Koper for providing information for us today. And I would ask that all the attendees just take a minute after we close the program today to answer a very brief survey that'll give us some feedback on this program and let us know for future programs what we need to prepare and get ready. So thank you all again for attending, and we appreciate you coming today.
Thank you, Dr. Krishnan.
Absolutely. Thank you.